Hello, listeners and citizens of Broncos country. My name is Adan Diaz, and welcome to Broncos Talk. I am joined by my co-host at Richie. How are you today, Rich?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. I have to admit, Rich, before we came on the air and we talked a little bit, I rushed my dinner. It was really hot, so I do apologize if for the rest of this podcast I sound kind of funny. The roof of my mouth is starting to cool down, so I just wanted to say that in advance. But anyways, guys, welcome to Broncos Talk. We are a fan-based, Broncos-based podcast where we are here to answer your burning Broncos questions, as well as just to talk around what's going on around the NFL league. So, Rich, before we get into talking about today's subject, which is the Broncos offense, we need to talk about the breaking news that happened yesterday, and that's the signing of one J.J. Watt to Arizona. Now, I've been watching the sports shows the last yesterday and today, and you know what? I think the one that I lean my opinion on agreeing with the most is the one with Shannon Sharp. He basically said that he doesn't see the addition of J.J. Watt to that Cardinals defense to make it say like, okay, now this team's a Super Bowl contender. Because as great as J.J. Watt was when he first started, the last couple of years he's been injury plagued, and he hasn't really shown that he can be that type of guy. Now he's joining a very talented defense which is led by, ironically, one Vance Joseph. So while I do agree that he could find succession in Arizona, I don't think that it's going to be it does it. I don't think it's going to I don't think it puts Arizona in the map in terms of, hey, it's Super Bowl or nothing.
No, I mean, in all fairness, though, who else did the Texans have on their defense?
Well, they had Clowney for a short time.
Aside from that, he showed up and he's not there anymore. I mean, like realistically, no, and I'm more referring to last season too, right? So Clowney was over with even for a short time there. Clowney was with was it the Titans, wasn't he, for a little bit? But really, what it comes down to is JJ was really the center point and the centerpiece of that defense. Now he was getting paid as such as well, which makes a lot of sense for that to be the case. But there was no one else really that was there that was a focal point or a focus point for any of the opposing offenses. So it doesn't really matter who you are. If you can get triple teamed most of the time, or even a double team and then like a chip or whatever the case may be, you're probably not going to get back into the backfield all that often. But what you are going to do is basically drive all the attention to you, and then that should leave the rest of the defense to have free reign. Problem is that when your defense isn't particularly good, the only thing they're hitting free is free agency the following year, because they're not that, the team just wants to cut them. So I actually disagree with Shannon on that, because I think there's two things that JJ brings to any team in the NFL now. One is he can teach guys how to work, why to work that way, and to show proven success of working the way that he does. So I actually think JJ's best value to the Arizona Cardinals isn't just this season, but I actually could totally see the Cardinals doubling down on either a defensive end or trying to bolster that defensive line while JJ Watt is there, which will be totally counterintuitive to all these kind of talking heads on TV, because they're going to say, why would you go ahead and get all these draft guys and whatever to kind of fill the same position that JJ plays? Well, it's for the same reason. You want them to learn under him, because he's on a 2-year deal, and then eventually he's going to leave.
Yeah. Before we get to the comments, let me just add that I do think it's an interesting piece, front line that they have in terms of, Chandler Jones, now J.J. Watt. They have Budda Baker, and I forget the name of the other, Isaiah Simmons, the man that they drafted last season. So, I mean, it's an interesting piece, a set of guys, Rich. But when we get to free agency, it's almost like we're going to get to see what the casualty is in terms of what the Cardinals had to give up in terms of, okay, they managed to lure in J.J. Watt, but the money they paid to have J.J. Watt has got to come out of it's got to come out of somebody's pocket. So we know Patrick Peterson is probably not going to come back with the team, and it'll be interesting to see what who else they cut off in for free agency. But first of all, let's hello to everybody in the chat: Albert, Jason, Mohammed, Kenneth, Chad. Hello to all you guys. Thanks for joining in. Make sure you get your comments and questions in for Rich and myself. Jason O'Neill says, honestly, don't think he is chasing a ring. I like the guy, but I feel he chased the money, even though rumors said the Colts and the Browns offered more. Your thoughts, Richie?
Yeah. I guess he's referring to JJ trying to chase a ring. I don't know. He wants a ring, but you're then also banking on Kyler Murray, who's done okay but not spectacular in the NFL. Realistically, right?
Right.
So Kyler Murray does need to take that next step up, and that offense needs to take that next step up. But again, when you have a quarterback on a young, like on a rookie deal, and a young guy like Kyler, who is shown to be quite elusive in those kind of little run stretch plays and stuff like that, you can do some things because you have the cap space in order to do it.
That's right. Kenneth Booker, welcome, my friend. He says, the verdict is still out, but Chandler Jones and JJ could be nice, and a change of scenery could give him a spark. Either way, I'm excited to see how it pans out. And I was actually telling my brother this the other day, that I do believe that it can be differently said, that although Vance Joseph for us wasn't a really good head coach, so far he's been a decent defensive coordinator for Arizona. I mean, he hasn't been fantastic, and when he was in Miami before he came to Denver, it also wasn't something that was just eye-popping. So he could learn something. Not learn something. Let me phrase that. He could show something in that division, because I mean, they still have to deal with the 49ers, who are still going to boast one of the best defenses once all their guys come back healthy next season. And that's saying if they don't lose anybody in free agency or to trade. The Seahawks, the defense got a little better, but their offense, I mean, I feel sorry for Russell Wilson. He's having issues now. That offensive line, if it doesn't get restructured or resettled or something, they could be in for a long season. And then the Rams, I mean, even though Brandon Staley's gone, that defense, that front line is just, with the coming back of Leonard Floyd, who's having a resurgence since leaving Chicago. I mean, that's going to be one heck of a division to be an offensive line in.
Yeah, San Fran, didn't they stack like 3 or 4 first-round defensive linemen or something in a row, and all within reasonably high picks? Like it was pretty substantial, and on top of that, not only did they not draft those, they drafted those guys high, but they actually hit. Like all of those guys hit. Like they didn't miss on I think any one. I think all 4 that they drafted all hit. So you almost wonder if we couldn't have grabbed like someone from the San Francisco kind of GM office for a Broncos GM, because they really killed it. But no, when you look at what San Fran's done and a couple of those other teams you mentioned, I agree. My only comment on VJ, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say it out loud, because I mean, how many pressers did we see with this comment? And I mean, at the end of the day, the Arizona Cardinals defense are going to just have such a great day of practice.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
I mean, that practice is going to be so impressive that you're just going to say, wow, what an awesome practice. And then, at the end of all of that, those claps are going to come out on the field, and it's all about that practice.
Chad Marcellus says he's seen me with VJ as my coach on Madden. Let me tell you something. I am on season 2042 of franchise mode in Madden 19, and Vance Joseph is the only original head coach still left out of everybody. So it's the only playbook I know. I've tried playing other coaches' playbooks before I started franchise, but Vance Joseph's was the only one I can vibe with, and it's helped me win countless seasons. So that's my excuse for that. But anyway, he also asked us a question here, Richie, and it can kind of help us segue into today's topic of the show, which is the Broncos offense. He asked, who do you guys like to see Denver signing on day one of free agency? Now, this is an interesting question, Richie, because I've thought about this and I really don't have a specific answer because I'm still kind of waiting to see what Denver does in terms of their signings, you know, if they're going to re-sign Von Miller and to how much, if they're going to sign Shelby Harris and for how much, and if they're going to sign Justin Simmons and for how much. Because I figure once we get those three answers, then we can kind of see, you know, who it is that they'll try to see maybe shop around for a trade, who they're going to, you know, let walk and try in free agency and try to fill in terms of void and maybe for the draft. But if I had to guess, though, I would probably think that they might either sign a cornerback or a linebacker just to try to get some sort of roster. So that way, should we ever get caught with in that injury bug situation again, that we're not literally clawing at just random people to come in and play defensive football.
I do agree in some respects, but the flip side of that, I mean, you have to remember we had an undrafted free agent cornerback signed off of the 49ers practice squad come in and start in a game for a reasonable period of time and look pretty good. So I have to say, I think that our defensive coaches, and this is where I think my opinion may differ from some others out there, I think our defensive coaches are just that good. I honestly think that when they go out to target someone, and they are targeting people, make no mistake about it, they are looking at their scheme and they are looking at player style. And they're saying, that's the guy we want because he fits kind of our mold and we can make that work. And as a result, you saw an undrafted guy like Motley come in and he did pretty well. Now, with regards to free agency and stuff, I agree. I think it makes a big difference in terms of what we do with Simmons. I do think we need to be extremely careful with Simmons because if we start seeing slippages on our defense, and I also think we need to be very, very careful because if we end up in a really bad spot and we do not retain the defensive coordinator that we currently have to keep the Fangio scheme for defense in place, I think we can be in a really, really tough spot because if we get a new DC in who then changes up our defensive scheme, Justin Simmons may not be the best piece going long-term overall. It just depends on the style that we want to play. I think that we would do ourselves a huge service if we went after an athletic inside linebacker to add some speed and sideline to sideline capabilities to that particular area of the field. I believe if we do that, then it will allow us as a team to have Simmons kind of probably do a little bit more what he's better at, which is roam the field and cover guys as opposed to trying to be as physical as we've seen him attempt to be. And I use the word attempt because he seems to do far, far better in pass pro than he does in run coverage.
Very well said, my friend. Albert Knopper is a loyal fan of the show. Thanks for watching. He says, do you think they should sign Van Noy? Van Noy was cut from the Dolphins today, which was kind of a surprise, Rich, after he signed a pretty big contract last year with the Dolphins. So I'm trying to remember what his season was like last year. I don't know if he had injuries, but I'm kind of not always on board with defensive players that come from the Belichick system because there's always a high expectation of trying to get what they did when they were with New England. You know, Jamie Collins is probably one of the best examples I can think of. he went to Cleveland, then he went back to New England where he flourished a little bit better, and then he went to he went to Detroit, and then he kind of went back towards the bottom. So Van Noy, I believe, he's a linebacker, right? So I mean, if he can try to work in a Vic Fangio system and he can be signed at a reasonable price, I think Peyton might give him a shot. But I don't know if Van Noy can be that linebacker that can kind of wedge the gap in between Alexander Johnson and Honey Bear, and maybe not completely solve their answer where they have to look towards the draft for either a cornerback or a linebacker. But I don't know. I guess we'd have to see what the GM feels about that.
I'd make it a point to try and avoid anything to do with the Dolphins. Unfortunately, my father is a Dolphins fan. So the biggest thing for me is I look at the box score and then I look at the quarterback highlights and stuff and anything I can find to send some kind of poking the bear style email I look for. But aside from that, I don't typically follow the Dolphins as much. Van Noy is a side-to-side linebacker, but his fit is really. I think it would probably do pretty well in a Fangio style defense. I actually think, as much as I would normally agree with you, I am always skeptical, and I mean highly skeptical of New England players because Belichick drafts for a scheme. I've actually said this on a couple of our pods earlier, which is what type of scheme, style, however you want to call it, are you going to play? Is it going to be are you looking for cogs to fill in kind of specific styles and roles? That's kind of what you see from Bill Belichick in terms of what he does with his defense. That's also part of the reason why you see guys like Van Noy and Collins. They do well when they're in that style of defense. Why? Well, there's a reason why Belichick drafted them, and there's a reason why he wanted some of those guys back, is because they have a certain complement of skill sets, and Belichick wants them to flourish using those skill sets. I believe Fangio is actually quite similar to that. You've seen Vaughn. He's lost a little bit of that first step speed, I think, and that's in part, I think, because of some of his injuries. And I think it's also in part because as you age, you do tend to lose some of that quick twitch. And you're seeing Fangio trying to extend Vaughn's career a little bit more, even though, people may not be really happy that it's happening. But Vaughn is dropping back a lot more into both coverage and run stopping. And Vaughn even admitted in several of his interviews, if you've watched them, where he said that's a huge part of what I'm building on my game. And you wonder why he was doing that 3 or 4 years ago. Well, it's exactly for what we're seeing right now. Is Vaughn recognizes that he can only be that fast, that quick off the line for so long. So he's got to pivot his style and his career and extend it so he can actually do better. I like Van Noy actually as a potential signing for us. But to answer the original question that started all of this in terms of free agents and stuff like that, we need to make a decision on whether or not as a team, as a collective team, we believe Drew Lock can come back to us this year having learned that he needs to do better and needs to fix 1 or 2 of his top 3 issues, ball placement, footwork, and reading defenses. I think the most important is ball placement, and then I think the next one would be footwork because they can sometimes go hand in hand. I think reading defenses will simply come with time, so I'd like to see him work on the first 2. And if he can come in having corrected those things, working with a coach in the offseason and those sorts of things, I actually think we're going to see a far and away improved Drew Lock coming back to the Broncos. If he does what he did last season for us, which is, from all I could tell, just kind of coasted in and said, the job's mine, let's go. I think we need to target someone more like Fitzpatrick, because Fitzpatrick can come in and actually play and start when and if we need him to. We saw what he did with, for example, what little few of the games of the Dolphins I did see, Fitzpatrick came in and basically was that safety blanket for the Dolphins when Tua was basically not looking spectacular. And then he helped them win those games, which is why there's a little bit of that controversy going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we would like more of a mentor role in terms of a good quarterback that can come in and still play if Drew gets hurt, but is also willing and has shown over the course of his career that when it comes to that, he will mentor a quarterback. I would like to maybe then go after on day one a quarterback like Alex Smith rather than Ryan Fitzpatrick. I just think it depends on where we are as a team and where we believe Drew Lock sits.
Very well said. Chad also asks us, I think this year Lock will have a short leash since our coaches are playing for their jobs. Thoughts? Now, this is actually a very good point, Chad, and I actually totally agree with you. And the important thing that we have to kind of keep remembering, and it's something that we don't realize it because we're so used to everything being, it's either the L-way or the highway type of thing for the last 11 years, is that nobody's job is safe. George Paton is here to correct the ship, to wake up a sleeping giant, as he has previously stated in previous statements. So we already know that the quarterback position is not safe because we all know he tried to make a run at Matthew Stafford. And should Deshaun Watson be up for grabs, we all know that that Peyton is going to make a run to try to land Deshaun Watson. And if that doesn't work out, then he more than likely might try to get one of the veteran quarterbacks during free agency. But also the head coaching job could be up for grabs. Defensive coordinator, I don't really, unless the defense really lays an egg, but it's not going to happen because Vic Fangio and I can't think of his name.
Donatel.
Thank you, Ed Donatel. They're two peas in a pod. They're so similar. And Ed Donatel is really, really respected and loved in that locker room. Though the guys played their hearts out when he was out with COVID for those first 3 weeks during the season. So aside from maybe them, and I think the head coach and maybe the quarterback's coach are probably the two hottest positions. Actually, let me take that back, including the offensive coordinator. Those three jobs will be under the microscope this season, where if the head coaching, the timeouts, and the navigation of team gameplay and everything is not corrected, Vic Fangio will be out. If Pat Shurmur's offense cannot get the ball moving and we're still stuck in the mud, new quarterback or old, he'll be gone. And if Shula cannot get Drew Lock going, and the front office feels that the quarterback's coach is not living up to par, then he'll more than likely be on his way out. And all of that stuff, Rich, can probably happen before the end of the 2021 season.
There are so many moving parts potentially with the Broncos. For me, I think in a minority actually in Broncos country. I want them to fire Shurmur now. I don't care about continuity. I'm looking at it from a realistic standpoint. So I don't believe Shurmur can adapt. I also don't think he's a quarterback whisperer of any way, shape, or form. He's just not that good. And when you look at his average offensive rankings over the course of his career in the NFL, he's in the low to mid 20s. So, I mean, you're not now. Look, he had that 1 year where he was like third or fourth or something like that, in somewhere in that, or between third and fifth. But you can't use a single year outlier and extrapolate that to being the entirety of an individual's career. That is, in fact, an outlier. And it needs to be treated as such. When you look at the majority of his rankings, he was not particularly good. So I would actually like to see us give Drew the best possible chance of succeeding, and that is bringing in an offensive coordinator who is more creative, that can scheme guys open, as opposed to relying on the quarterback making all of the right reads 100% of the time, which is basically how the Shurmur offense functions, and allow Drew and that offensive coordinator to grow together. Because I actually think that Fangio would potentially be given yet another year after this if we see major leaps forward in offensive play, right? So, for example, I think hell will freeze over before a Fangio defense is in the 20s in terms of ranking. like let's just be like, I really do. Fangio had, I can't remember what the figure was in terms of dollar value, but it was something absolutely like mind-blowing in terms of the dollar value he had on IR. And then when you looked at the number of defensive backs that he had on IR by the end of the year, there were 6 of them. So the fact that he was able to rank as high as he did and then still end up, I think, with the number ranked red zone right up until the last game of the year says pretty much all you need to know about how darn good his defense is. And it is just that good. And that's coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Offensively, though, we were not particularly great. And I think that's where the OC comes into play. And if we want to give Locke a chance to succeed, I think you need to give him a better coach, which will then, yes, it's another offense. I understand. but I also think you need to look at it from a long-term perspective, is that if you are truly saying, I want to give someone the best chance to succeed, then you need to give Locke someone who can give him the best tools to succeed.
Albert Knoppers adds, footwork is important, but not everything. Look at Mahomes. He can throw pretty accurate no matter what foot placement he's in. The one thing Locke needs to focus on is what location he plays for accuracy, high altitude versus low. And that's actually, there's some truth to that, Albert. But at the same time, see, and that's going back to trying to compare quarterbacks to Mahomes. I mean, if you saw the Super Bowl, not only was Mahomes running for his life, but he was throwing footballs sideways, upside down, in the air. I mean, and I really don't want Drew Lock to do that, because Drew Lock did try to do that during last season, and it didn't work out. He tried to be that cool quarterback who throws a no-look pass, or who throws the ball, tries to surprise him throwing the ball just before he passes the line of scrimmage. And we saw when he did that to Kansas City. That's not the quarterback that Drew Lock is. He's not that kind of, trickster. That's not him. And I really don't want him going down that path, because at the same time, that's not the kind of plays that Pat Shurmur runs. Let's face it, Drew Lock is a gunslinger. He can throw the ball. The problem is that the accuracy of where he throws the ball is that's his biggest issue. Also, him not trusting his pocket and always trying to run when he doesn't have to, or, trying to move up in between the tackles and, looking for a play. That's also been one of his weaknesses. So I don't want Drew Lock to try to be like Mahomes or to be like any other quarterback. I just want Drew Lock to be like Drew Lock. Bye, go to them.
Yeah, the thing with Mahomes, though, is when you watched him make those, I heard him refer to as dodgeball throws, and I think that's, it's not that far off, really, when you look at some of them. He actually leveraged his feet and his footwork to square himself up before he dove. So while I will absolutely agree that footwork isn't 100% like the be-all and end-all, Mahomes did use his footwork and his training and his practice to keep himself squared. And so before he dove, he kind of he used his feet to keep his shoulders squared. And then when you looked at him when he threw, even as he was diving, he was ensuring that he was trying to structure his shoulders to kind of keep the ball on point and accurate. But that started with his legs and his footwork. Now, was he horizontal when he eventually made the throw? Yeah. Which is why the fact that he hit his receiver in the numbers after diving like that and the guy dropped it, that's what made it even more impressive, and why the announcers were, going gaga over it, and why we are still talking about it now.
Yeah.
However, I do completely agree with you, 6 foot. Drew's issue is he didn't trust the pocket when he could have, and then he didn't shift from the pocket when he should have. And above and beyond all that, the one play that I really think spoke volumes to Drew's, I would say, immaturity as a quarterback, was he had an actual throw that he could have made that could have been caught to Fumagalli when he was over at the sideline. And he was kind of throwing off target, and he threw to the inside shoulder rather than the outside shoulder. And that to me basically said that literally summarized Drew Luck's season for me, which was he just wasn't throwing with purpose, and his accuracy and where he was aiming, either he was aiming incorrectly or he just didn't have the proper footwork and he didn't have the proper kind of mentality, or I hear processor used a lot. I think that's also an appropriate term to make those throws the right way. He needs to work on that this offseason. And frankly, if he doesn't, he's going to be in for, in my opinion, basically a perpetual backup role bouncing around the league.
Yeah. Mr. Boggins, my good friend, he says, Mahomes played baseball, Drew played basketball. It
Completely
shows
agree.
in throwing mechanics. And he's totally right.
100%.
Throwing mechanics, 100%. Patrick Mahomes' father, if I'm not mistaken, was a very famous pitcher in the major leagues. So you can, it's no surprise where he gets the throwing motions from. But let's go to Tim Durr, who's been waiting to ask us a question. He says, is Philip Lindsay playing for the Broncos next year? You know what? And this is something that's been kind of talked about around in social media, Richie. I've been seeing a couple comments from people. People love, Broncos country loves Philip Lindsay. They love the Colorado kid, as he's been dubbed. But, you know, unfortunately, in this league, as a fan, no matter how much you love a player that plays for your team, you'd love to see them play their entire career with that team. But it doesn't seem like Lindsay and the front office are on the same page. There's a lot of aggression there. You know, we've seen Lindsay go out and make statements against the Pat Shurmur offense in terms of, you know, his usage in it. And usually when a player goes off against a coach's decision and how they use him or whatever, that's just kind of their way of saying, hey, I'm not happy here. And I don't want to play here anymore. So the Broncos could be looking. I don't know if Philip Lindsay will be a free agent this year. I can
a restricted free agent.
Restricted. Thank you. So the Broncos could end up trading him if he decides not to play. But I mean, me personally, I would love to see him stay and maybe try to give this whole Pat Shurmur offense another shot, because Melvin Gordon, we still don't know what's going to happen with his court case. He could be suspended for 2, maybe 3 weeks. And it's a lot of pressure to just put on if Royce Freeman is even still on the Broncos team come next season. So I would love to see Philip Lindsay stay in Denver, but if the Broncos decide to move on from him or trade him or something, then I'd wish him all the best elsewhere.
I think his public comments basically, I don't know what else you can really say. I think that pretty much all, but he basically told the team, I think, that he was unhappy with how he was used, why they used him the way they did, and the fact that he felt that he could do better. And it's unfortunate, because I think that again speaks volumes to our offense and our offensive coordinator adapting to the players that he has at his disposal. I think that also kind of dovetails a little bit into kind of one of the topics here the bigger topic that we're trying to get into. And I think that's a perfect kind of segue, if you will, into the broader offensive topic that we're kind of wanting to get to. And that is the importance of knowing how and what you want to run, and why that should shape and does shape the successful teams and why they're successful. So for example, when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Baltimore Ravens, even, I think if let's just throw at all the other teams and let's just simply look at the Baltimore Ravens. Yes, they haven't done spectacularly well in the playoffs. But at the same time, they knew their quarterback, and they knew that their quarterback offered some special skill sets that others did not. They completely took an offensive scheme that was geared and basically catered towards a statue in the pocket in Joe Flacco, and completely turned it on its head with some substantive wrinkles, actually, when you look at how it was run, to adapt it to Lamar Jackson. the Baltimore Ravens made no mistake and knew exactly what they wanted to do. Now, let's look at the Broncos. I still don't know what we want to run, because we started the year with a layered passing attack in the Pat Shurmur kind of passing scheme, which failed abysmally. Drew had a very hard time making those anticipatory throws and reading kind of the defensive reads and that kind of stuff. As the defense kind of slowly, notched its way down to Drew's level, we still didn't really have an offensive identity. We still didn't know if we wanted to run the ball more than pass it. We still didn't know how we wanted to run the ball. And then finally, by like week 10, I think it was, we started to see what I believe to have been a highly influenced Mike Montchak run game, where we started to see the pulling guards. And that's when Drew started to look more comfortable, where we started to see a better run game, started to slow the game down, and it allowed Drew to do more. But we still didn't know as a team, even then, who we wanted to be. So I throw over to you in terms of the offense. What did you see last year from our team, and what did you see what worked and what did you see that didn't? And looking ahead next year, what would you like to see change?
Well, to be honest with you, Rich, if I had to say anything, I would probably tell all of Broncos country to look at our game against Carolina, because that game was Drew Lock's best game all season, even better than his comeback against the Chargers, who are a division rival in their first meeting. And the reason I say that is because Drew Lock looked like the quarterback we expected him to be week one. He only made one mistake that entire game against Carolina, and that's when he threw that really ugly interception. Not interception. He took a sack and he lost the ball on fumble. So ball security is an issue that Drew Lock has to work on going forward. But at the same time, the fact that he was able to, call audibles in the line, basically saying, Hamler, go long, or, Melvin Gordon, go this way, pull in the tackles. That offense that day was spectacular. And I came on the air and said, if we can go the next couple of weeks playing offense just like that against another team, whether their defense is better than Carolina's or not, then Drew Lock, that helps put a feather in Drew Lock's cap and saying, hey, look, we're starting to get this, the injuries. Yeah, they've been there was a line I read by by an NFL analyst who basically every week he ranks where the Broncos fall in terms of all standings. And he said, while the injuries should not be ignored, they also shouldn't be like the main reason why the Broncos are playing the way they are, So but
they weren't.
Well, they weren't, but
they weren't, because our problems were not defensive, and most of our injuries were defensive injuries. Our problems were offensive, where I think I've said this before. I've certainly tweeted it out. Up until actually all the way through the end of the year, the only day one starter that was out injured was Courtland Sutton. Albert O was never a slated day one starter for our team. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I wanted to see him start a lot earlier than he did and play a lot more than he did earlier. But he was never slated as a day one starter for us. So really, on the offensive side of the ball, the only day one starter we were missing was Courtland Sutton.
No, but I think what the analyst's point was that he was trying to basically say, keep in mind that Denver is they're scratching the bottom of the barrel in terms of trying to get defensive players, but that's the defense. The offense should not be struggling like that, because like you said, we did lose Courtland Sutton, and then we did lose Albert O, but we still had our running backs. We still had most of our O-line intact. Drew Lock was, hit and miss, but he came back from his injury. So the offense should not have been a struggling point. They should have been the strength. They should have been the anchor saying, okay, you know what, defense, we know you're struggling. We're going to try to get you through this. And unfortunately, they struggled against the Chargers. I mean, all those passes that Jerry Jeudy missed, and then that I don't even know what you want to, that beautiful 90-something yard touchdown run by Jeudy against the Raiders in the last game, and then the Broncos unfortunately still go off and lose that game.
So thank you, Boggins, for joining. I appreciate it. This is exactly my point, though, right? In what I said earlier, who do you want to be and why do you want to be that way? So as an example, Rypien, I actually really like. In fact, I think I like him more than a lot of other people. When I saw him come into the Jets game, sure, he threw this 3 interceptions, but the Jets defense was actually fairly decent. They weren't spectacular, but they were fairly decent. And that was his first game that he played, and he came in cold off the bench. So I actually liked how he played, and I thought he played with a lot of poise, and I thought he made a lot of really great adjustments. But that's exactly my point, is who do you want to be? So if you need a quarterback who can digest, or as I said earlier, process information quickly, then you need to have that player or that quarterback on your roster running that offense. If you have a quarterback who cannot process information like that and digest it quickly like that, and then play accordingly and play quickly, then you need to change your offense to adapt to the quarterback and the players that you have on your team. So that's the big issue that I have with our team right now, is that we are not adapting and or prioritizing playing the players that fit the offensive scheme that our OC wants to run.
Yeah, and Kenneth Booker, I can see where you're coming from. He says Nick gives me so much crap for liking Rypien.
And send Nick my way, and we'll have some words.
I can see. Look, let's get one thing straight, Broncos country, and this is an issue that kept coming up during the regular season, where people, I don't even know if you want to say fans, but just Broncos country or Broncos fans in general, they wanted Brett Rypien to go out there and do what he did against the Jets. You know, it was like, okay, Driscoll was struggling against Tampa Bay. And it's like, okay, we'll put Brett Rypien in. And I'm sitting there. I was at work at the time, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, there is no way that Brett Rypien can go in there and shred the Tampa Bay defense, because it was just, I mean, from what I was reading on my phone, it was just like, you know, the punter missnapped the ball, and you know the Bucs took over, and the Bucs defense or the Broncos defense was struggling trying to contain Tom Brady. So it was like, it was more than just the offense not keeping up, you know. And that was a win that the Broncos really needed, because you know, beating Tom Brady in Denver has almost been like a tradition at Mile High, whether he's a Patriot or a Buck. And the fact that he was able to leave Mile High with a win, even as a different team, hurt.
Right, but to kind of go back and Nick and I joke all the time on Twitter, so that's that's fine. But that's exactly what my problem though is that Driscoll is kind of a little bit of both Drew and Brett, but not enough of either to be anything. Brett seems to process the information very quickly. And so if you have a defense that's coming at you and really causing you grief, he's going to do a lot of the things that Driscoll simply can't do. In fact, in my opinion, I think in that game, Rypien would have probably been the better quarterback to be put in, because what you saw from him in the Jets game was line adjustments. And I mean actual line adjustments where he was, you know, pointing out coverages and then basically being what you want from a quarterback on a team, which is basically telling his offense to say, you know, this guy, you know, this scheme, or this is looking this way and this is looking this way. You go here, you go here. It's basically a lot of the things that Drew typically doesn't do. And we really didn't see Drew start to do some of those things until way, way later in the year. And even then, I think the only reason why Drew was able to do some of those things is because he knew that the route trees and then the offense that he was running was far less complicated than it was at the very beginning of the year. So he had a lot less to process at the line. So he was then able to then do some of those other things, whereas Brett Rypien was able to literally just take on the absolute onslaught of NFL information that he needed to at the line of scrimmage and adjust accordingly. Now, I am not saying that Brett Rippon is like the next Tom Brady. That's not what I'm saying with these comments at all. Far from it, actually. But what I am saying is that fit makes a huge difference. And you either have a player that fits your scheme and then therefore you play them instead of another guy who may even be somewhat more talented overall in terms of tools and skill set, and you can do really, really well. Or you have to change your scheme, a la the Ravens with Lamar Jackson, what they did, and then fit that whole scheme around that player to then completely adjust. And then also what you do is you then cut and draft accordingly. So you cut the players that don't fit what you're trying to do, and then you draft players that do fit what you're trying to do.
Right. And I'm sorry, Steelos, I missed this question in the chat. I do apologize. And it's not really so much a question, but it's a comment, and I think it's something that we can talk about here, Rich. He says, if Vic doesn't work out, we should sign Joe Brady, Eric Bieniemy, or Brian Daboll to take over. Now, these three candidates are going to be really interesting going forward into next season because they have the potential of turning their teams around. Brian Daboll was just 2 games away from a Super Bowl championship, let alone 1 game. Eric Bieniemy was just 1 win away from winning a back-to-back Super Bowl title championship. And Joe Brady, he's shown some promise with Teddy Bridgewater. The only thing that worries me about Joe Brady at the moment is the fact that it doesn't look like Bridgewater is going to be the quarterback in Carolina, because it doesn't seem like he enjoyed that they're in on the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes. So, Bridgewater took that pretty heavily. So if the Panthers happen to land a big name like Deshaun Watson, it could be Joe Brady maybe deciding to stay in Carolina and, continue to mentor a guy like that. So Steelos, what I'm basically trying to tell you is that it'll be great to see if either one of these 3 guys are still in the head coaching, search next season, should Vic Fangio not work out. The problem, or not the problem, but the question is, who's going to be throwing the ball at the helm that either one of these 3 guys can be like, okay, if, the Broncos have X player and Y player and Z player, I can work with that. I can turn this team around.
I actually like Daboll, and then in the comments here, Tim has stepped up with another kind of comment there. I actually like Leftwich as well as another option. I think that if you're going to, if for whatever reason Vic really does not do well this season at all, I think you absolutely have to go to an offensive-minded coach. I also happen to be a huge fan of what Buffalo has done. I mean, just as a team, I don't as a football fan, I never watched Bills games a lot. I'm in the greater Toronto area, so the NFL really wanted me to be a Bills fan. How did that work out? And so with regards to that, they just really wanted me to be a Bills fan. So I always had Bills on my mind, and I actually go down to Buffalo, well, before they closed our borders, a lot. And so I really, really, really liked what Buffalo did. But I do like Leftwich, and I like how they have adapted things. So as an example, Leftwich has incorporated some New England offensive concepts to allow for Brady to feel more comfortable, and then still dovetailing in some of those Bruce Arians concepts into the offensive game plan. I think that shows adaptability. And per my previous comments, that's the exact opposite of what Shermer has shown us. So I think having that influence on our team to basically say, be progressive, don't regress, and certainly don't stay static, I think is a good message to send to the team, because you should always want to be better.
Yeah, I'm not big on the who's the better offensive coordinator or whatever in terms of coaching searches. So I normally don't throw my 2 cents into that hat. But I mean, I can honestly tell you those names were the most mentioned names this past off season, and Eric Bieniemy has even hit the the talk shows in terms of why some people feel that he shouldn't have been, looked over in terms of a head coaching job. And to that, I would have to say, kind of what Kenneth is saying right here. He says Bieniemy has the perfect job in Kansas City. I would stay put if I was him. I would pull a Dick LeBeau and stay a coordinator on a great team. And that, to me, Rich, is kind of what I'm thinking is going to happen with Bieniemy, where he's going to stay in Kansas City as long as Andy Reid is calling the shots. And then should Andy Reid decide to call it a career or go elsewhere, then they might offer him the job as head coach in Kansas City, or who knows. But if we learned anything from Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels, where McDaniels was supposed to be the head coach in Indy, and then at the last second he's like, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm gonna go back to OC. So I mean, I would love to have a guy like Eric Bieniemy as a head coach in Denver, because I think that the fact that he can work with somebody like Patrick Mahomes and make an offense work that benefits him. I think that Bieniemy can maybe do that with almost any quarterback. Try to find an offense or players to work with that offensive scheme.
Bieniemy has two issues, in my opinion. One is he hasn't been able to showcase and prove that he has architected large elements of that offense. And Andy Reid's little Super Bowl spiel there didn't help. Andy Reid was basically saying that he has an open door policy, and then he wants plays and stuff brought from every which way. So what we saw from that was basically Andy Reid ingests a bunch of plays, picks and chooses, or at least passes them off over to Bieniemy, who then puts them in, but then Andy Reid basically has final veto. So the problem that you end up there with that as an arrangement is that the offensive architect is clearly then Andy Reid. It's not Eric Bieniemy. Now, that doesn't mean that Eric doesn't bring a whole bunch of unique skill sets to the table, because he clearly does. Andy Reid would certainly not be keeping someone like Eric on staff if he wasn't a talented individual, because Andy respects, he recognizes talent when he sees it, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, though, I don't know why Eric would ever want to come here to Denver. Why would Bieniemy ever want to be a head coach of the Denver Broncos? He knows Andy Reid has Patrick Mahomes. He knows Andy Reid and his offensive prowess. And if he ends up here in Denver, that typically would then mean that Drew did not work out, and whoever he brought in also didn't work out. So that would mean that we're right back to quarterback square one in all likelihood. And why would someone like Eric want to then leave Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, where he's getting, modest accolades for the offense, at least some credit for it, to come to a team who's going to be in at least another 1 to 2 years of quarterback carousel and risk at that point losing the head coaching job, because you probably are going to have another 2 losing seasons.
I mean, you can almost make the same case for in terms of what's his name, Adam Gase, when he left the Broncos after him and Peyton Manning had a Cinderella, fantastic 2013 season, and then Adam Gase leaves the Broncos to go to the Bears with John Fox. But like I said, I don't feel well, let's go back to a comment that Mr. Boggins says. He says, Dable doesn't run the ball. I wouldn't want the ball in Locke's hands that much. Now, that goes to, while that is true, because I have read that Dable doesn't run the ball a lot. He loves to throw the ball more. That's probably why Josh Allen's numbers are the way they are. But we also have to keep in mind, Broncos country, that whoever the head coach is after Fangio, they're more than likely going to clean as much house as they can. So that includes quarterback, that includes running backs and wide receivers, especially if they get a new offensive coordinator, which is usually more than likely. They start bringing in their people, or people that that think along their same wavelengths, and then with that comes, it's a whole new ball game in terms of offense, and even the offensive line can get shuffled around if a new coach is brought in. So either one of those guys is not going to piggyback off the Shermer system. They're going to bring in an identity that's entirely new to Denver, and that can hopefully go toe to toe with the likes of the Chargers, up and coming offense, the explosive offense that Kansas City has, and the, I guess you can call, roller coaster offense that's in Las Vegas.
Well, at that point there, you need to call a duck a duck. I mean, at this, what you're talking about is Daboll coming in 2022, not 2021. So I think, Boggins just needs to be mindful there, is that at that point there, Locke is all but done at that point in Denver, because that would assume, generally speaking, I think, that Locke would have had another partial go, probably at least in Denver in 2021, failed. And Denver would have at that point had yet another losing record, I would assume, or at least close to it. And Fangio would be fired. Locke would be traded for a ham sandwich probably at that point. And, you literally, the entire team would just be gutted. So at that point there, the issue wouldn't be the ball in Locke's hands. The issue would be, do you trust the ball in insert new quarterback here's hands? That would be the ultimate question at that point, in my opinion.
No, and I totally agree with you. And Tim Durr adds, Peyton most likely will bring his own coaches after next season, and that's pretty much kind of what I was saying. But that's with any team, you can kind of look at the Jets now that they have Robert Saleh as their team head coach. They're going to look at a whole new different thing. Glenn Hauser, good friend of mine and loyal MHRT podcaster, says, I say we get Rich's Beard to coach special teams. I second that vote. Mr. Baga says, and who would you bring in to start 2022? Free agency is barren, and the best quarterback in the draft would be fifth best this year.
And that is I'll take on that, no problem. That's exactly why I've said I think this year needs to be the year we target a quarterback. I would much rather have, well, first off, next year's draft, I mean, unless some quarterback in college all of a sudden goes bananas and starts blowing the doors off and people are saying, where did you come from, is not looking great. You have, what's that guy's name? Starts with an R. He had a really crappy interview and basically came off as an absolute pompous jerk. I refer to him as Fig Jam, which has a really bad word that starts with the letter F, and then a bunch of other stuff after that, which is basically, I'm good, just ask me. And so my issue with that is that you don't have great prospects next year, and I completely agree with that. I would like us to then say, if we're willing to trade, however many picks for Deshaun Watson and want to go for, thank you, that's Spencer Rattler. That's right. Thank you. If we're willing to trade all of these picks for all of these, for Deshaun Watson or for these other guys, in my opinion, what you'd want to then do is you either go after an Alex Smith or a Ryan Fitzpatrick, who probably have another 1 to 2 years, maybe 3 years left in them, and they could potentially step in for that period. That's a possibility. Or what I would prefer that we do is to say, we're going to bring in one of those really good guys, but I'd also like to have another quarterback to really push through long-term with a veteran guy if you're going to go that route. So it really all comes down to where our team feels about Drew. If they're looking at Drew Lock and saying that's the guy we want and that's where George Paton is at, then that's the guy you want. You stick with him and he's the guy you ride or die by. But I think at that point there, as a team and as fans, I think we need to understand that if Drew does not meet those level of expectations, there's a good to better chance that 2022 is not going to be a good year, and that our real target for benefiting our team should then be at the quarterback position, should then be in 2024. And what we should then be doing is focusing on making our team better.
I agree. And unfortunately, guys, that's going to do it for us today. We've run out of time. We hope that Rich and I were able to answer all of your questions and comments in the chat. Thank you so much for being active. And thank you so much for joining us, guys. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'd just like to remind you to please follow us on Facebook at MHRT Podcast, YouTube, MHRT Podcast, on Twitter at MHRT Podcast. If you want to follow Rich and myself directly, you see our Twitter handles right there on the screen. For our audio listeners, my Twitter handle is at the number 6FT10 MEXICAN, a 6'10" Mexican. My co-host is at RICHIRICHEH. You can Twitter us, DM us, tag us and ask us questions, and we can answer them. And even if you guys have ideas for a show, things that you'd like to see Rich and I talk about, we do like to take those things into advisement. So, let us know, or just stop by to say hi. Rich is always available to, have a good time and talk some football. And so am I, if I'm able to help. But with that being said, thanks to everybody here for joining us tonight. Our audio listeners on Anchor, thank you guys so much for tuning in, even after the fact. Make sure if you're able to support the show, whether you're listening on Anchor or Google or however far the audio version gets out. Thank you to everybody for the views, the listens. We hope you guys continue to support us. We hope that we're entertaining you of more than anything. And we will see you all next Tuesday. So for my co-host at Richie Rich, I'm sorry, Rich, do you have something to say before we go?
I just want to say thank you very much for everyone that joined. I saw a couple of new people in the chat. I really appreciate it. If you guys can share this out to other fellow Broncos fans, that would be greatly appreciated. We want to have as many diverse opinions in here as possible. And I'll see you guys next week. And there is a possibility that my beard may in fact be gone.
Well, see, now there you go. Now you all have something to look forward to, Broncos country. It'll be Richie's first telecast without the Fitzmagic beard. So
yeah, thank you.
For my co-host, Richie Rich, I'm Adon Diaz. Thank you all so much for joining us. We will see you all later, citizens of Broncos country.